Hello all, Pastor Rus here. Thanks for joining me on Pastor Rus Says. Here's this week's sermon. It is good to be back with you all this Sunday morning. I had the opportunity over the last week or so to spend a lot of time with family members that I hardly ever get to see. We were out west in Wyoming. Actually, we were in Wyoming, we were in Montana, we were in Idaho. I don't know if you've ever been to Yellowstone Park, but it is fantastically large. The park itself must be about the size of Ohio. It is just crazy. But we decided that was a good spot to go and to see things that our kids had never seen, and at the same time spend a lot of time with family members that I hardly ever get to see as a result of both distance and circumstance. It's quite a ways out to Wyoming. But because we were doing so much driving, and again, the scale is it's beyond anything that we see here on the East Coast. As you're driving around Yellowstone Park, it may take you an hour or an hour and a half to get where you're trying to go from one side of the park to just another corner of the park. And because it was also an opportunity to visit with family, we traded out drivers so as we would just sort of mix around who was sitting with whom as we drove our different vehicles. And at one point, I was sitting in a truck with my one sister, and we were having a conversation. How have you been doing? What's going on in your life? Just catching up. And she said, I listen to your sermons online. And I said, that's fantastic. I'm glad to hear that. She says, I laugh a lot. Are you supposed to laugh in church? I said, at First Lutheran you are. She said, I noticed that you put your life in a lot of your sermons. I said, I put my life in all my sermons. You preach what you know. She says, are we going to wind up in one of your sermons? So, Rebecca, if you're listening to me out there, yes. Just saying. It was a great week. It was a marvelous opportunity to spend time with the people that I love. Take my kids to see some incredible things and spend some time traveling with my family. While we were out there, we flew into Denver because it's really hard to fly into Wyoming. And as we were there in Denver, we had about a day after our flight where we could get to see a little Colorado. Now, a few things that you don't realize necessarily being from the east when you get to the west. The plains are vast. They're incredibly, incredibly vast. And as you're traveling across the Great Plains, what you don't realize is that they gently and slowly ascend. It looks like they're flat. It looks like it's just one big yard. But if you really look at the geography from a distance, it slowly goes up. So when you get to Colorado, you don't realize it, but you're nearly a mile above sea level. It looks like you're standing on flat ground. So we get to Colorado and we're walking around and we go to the Red Rock Amphitheater, which is this incredible natural amphitheater made out of giant, towering, solid stone. And it's this incredible sound and it's this beautiful setting. And as we were walking up the steps to the Red Rock Amphitheater, we realized that we are people who live closer to sea level. As we discovered, we could not breathe going up the steps. It was an interesting experience, but we also got a chance to go out to Boulder, Colorado, and see this incredible rock formation called the Flatirons. But one of the things that we wanted to see more than anything else that my wife had found online was this drive up Mount Evans. And it is absolutely breathtaking. I don't know if you've ever been on top of a mountain. This is the view from the top of Mount Evans. It is stunning. If you've never stood on top of especially one of the great Rocky Mountains, as you can tell from the sign behind me, 14,000 foot above sea level. Now, if you think it's hard to breathe when you're down on the plains, get to the top of Mount Evans. We get out of our car and we're like, just walking over to the visitor center, we're like leaning against things. These Coloradoans, they've got some built-up lungs, but the view was spectacular. It was just the most amazing thing. Now, as beautiful as this is, I should not send you all off to Colorado unaware. You may be saying to yourself, man, I want to go out west. I want to see the top of Mount Evans. I'll drive up there. This is the other thing you need to know. In order to get to the top of Mount Evans, you have to drive the road to the top of Mount Evans. So, the road to the top of Mount Evans looks like this. Oh, and it also looks like this. You may notice something missing from these photographs, and that is a guardrail. It is a 2-lane road that switchbacks up and up and up and up and up Mount Evans. Sometimes as you're coming around these corners, you see this curve here that looks like it goes off into nothing. To the right of that curve is about 1,000-foot drop-off. And no, there's no guardrail there. So we're driving this up and up and up and up. And my kids were having a lot of fun. Hannah, who actually loves heights, was like, yay, let's go higher. The other kids were having less fun with it. Let's just say it got a little noisy and screechy in the car from time to time. My favorite was we're going up, and coming back down the mountain is some incredibly brave soul who is driving a Winnebago. I don't know what this guy was thinking other than surely I can fit up there. And I'm on a 2-lane road, and as you can tell, there's mountain on one side, up, and there's mountain off on the other side. We found a switchback that I just zipped into as we're hanging off the edge of the mountain on this switchback, watching this RV just barely skimming by us. All of that would have been perhaps distracting enough if it wasn't for the fact that there were mountain goats on the road. Beautiful mountain goats walk along the road in Mount Evans. Every so often you have to stop and take photos because they're mountain goats. I mean, why wouldn't you stop and take photos? But as you're driving this incredibly perilous, terrifying, every so often during the wintertime, people die on it, road, dodging mountain goats and trying not to get run over by Winnebagos, you just have to sort of think, the view from the top's going to be really good, right? The view from the top's going to be really good because Mount Evans is, in fact, the North America's highest paved road. There is no way to get to a higher place in America in your car without walking up the mountain. And having now walked around the visitor center at Mount Evans, I can tell you, I would not want to try to hike up Mount Evans because I could barely walk around the top of Mount Evans. So at 14,000 foot, you realize that in order to get to this, you have to drive on that. In order to see the peak, you have to drive one of the more terrifying roads in all of North America. Now, you all know that I am recently recovering from a fear of heights. I'm getting much better at it. But what I discovered as I drove Mount Evans is the secret to it is not driving Mount Evans. The secret to it is just driving on a road. Just keeping your hands at 10 and 2. The secret to it is not being this person in this photo. Do not talk on your phone while drinking a latte and putting on your makeup. Not that I put on a lot of makeup normally when I'm driving. The secret to it is keeping your hands at 10 and 2. Otherwise, you're going to drive off the side of the mountain. That's never a good thing. So, and I don't get a whole lot of chance to quote Jim Morrison ever in a sermon, but the man said it right. Keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel. That's how you drive Mount Evans. 10 and 2, eyes on the road, watch out for the mountain goats. I highly recommend trying this sometime. And I mean Mount Evans, but also keep your eyes on the road as you drive. Because as dangerous as Mount Evans might be, the simple fact of the matter is, anytime we get behind the wheel of a car and we drive somewhere, there's a phenomenal quantity of danger inherent. Yes, if I'd have driven off the side of the road and driven off of the berm, I would have plunged the entire family to certain death. I kept saying to my wife what I hoped was comforting. I'd say, that drop-off's not so bad. I bet the car could roll and we'd be okay. And she kept saying to me, you're lying. And I was. But here's the thing. It's true for any time we get behind the wheel. It's true for any time we drive a car. If you're out there in the world, don't be talking on your cell phone while drinking a latte while putting on your makeup, because that's a pretty good way to drive off the side of the road. And if you're going 50 miles an hour or 60 miles an hour in a vehicle and you drive off the side of the road, you might as well have simply fallen off the side of Mount Evans, because the same quantity of damage can be done. So we have to stay focused when we drive. Of course, Jesus didn't drive. He had roads, but not quite like our roads. He had some Roman roads that were stone cut, and they were pretty permanent. He had some roads that were maybe cobblestone or brick, and they were semi-permanent. But mostly the roads that Jesus walked down were dirt roads. Drove down more than a couple of those while we were out west, too. And as Jesus is traveling around the world, around the ancient world, he also traveled a lot by ship. And he might have never said to anyone, keep your hands on the wheel and your eyes on the road, because that wasn't something people did back then. But he did say something very similar to this as he is talking to the folks today in the Gospel of Matthew. If you have read the Gospel of Matthew, there's this incredible story that we heard today where Jesus is preaching. And he's preaching to a great and vast crowd of people. And so great and vast is the crowd that eventually Jesus says to his disciples, look, guys, this is going to take a while. Why don't you guys get started ahead of me? Just get in the boat. I'll catch up with y'all. Cross over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee is actually a sizable place. It's a lake, but it's sort of a lake the same way Lake Erie is a lake. It's this enormous body of water that has cities that ring it. You can't see one city from the next. It's this huge body of water. It's still there. If you want to, you can go to the Sea of Galilee. In fact, this is a tourist boat on the Sea of Galilee that you could take. It's a lovely photograph from a tourist brochure. And so Jesus sends his disciples out on the ship, says, I'll catch up with you guys later. And if you look at this picture, like I said, this is from a tourist brochure. See how still and calm and beautiful the waters of the sea is, the Sea of Galilee. That's because this is a tourist photo. This is reality. The Sea of Galilee gets frequent storms off the Mediterranean. And because it is a very deep water lake, it is not unusual on the Sea of Galilee to see 20 and 30-foot swells. So this is what Jesus' disciples are facing as they're out in the boat. They've gone out in the boat, and it says that there's been a great windstorm come up, and they're literally being tossed on this water. We think of Jesus walking calmly across this glassy plain of water. That's not what the Scriptures say. The Scriptures say that there was a windstorm, and this is what windstorms look like on the Sea of Galilee. Breakers and waves and swells. And here's Jesus walking across these hills and valleys. And it's no wonder as the disciples are holding on for dear life, they see a figure coming through the midst of the water, and they look at each other and go, is that a ghost? And Jesus says, guys, it's me, relax, it's just Jesus. It's fine. I just thought I'd catch up with y'all. You guys went out on the boat, I just missed the crowds. And then I had to take a few quiet moments on top of a mountain to settle myself down and pray and have some time with the Father. It's good now, I'm coming to you. And Peter says, okay, Lord, if it's you, call me to come to you. Jesus says, sure, I'd like some company. Come on out. Walk to me, Peter. And so Peter starts doing that. He gets out of the boat. He looks at Jesus. He steps on the water and he begins to walk to Jesus on the water. This is an astounding thing. And for what happens next, I've got to give my full respect to Peter, because I don't know about y'all, but if I saw Jesus walking to me on the water, and it was stormy, and there were waves, and there were breakers, and the ship was bouncing, I'd have said, hey, Jesus, if that's you, come over here really quickly. Get in the boat with me. I wouldn't have said, let me come to you. So Jesus says, yeah, sure. So Peter's walking. And then he remembers, oh, yeah, There's a storm, and there's wind, and there's waves, and there's breakers, and there's things bouncing up and down, and I can barely stand upright in the midst of all this. And he looks at the storm, and he begins to sink. He panics. Now, I don't blame him for panicking. I don't panic. How many of us, if we were in that same situation, wouldn't have felt some anxiety? Now, I have friends who are as afraid of the water as I myself am getting over being afraid of heights. Can you imagine the fear that you would be experiencing in that moment? And then Jesus has this incredible conversation. And Jesus needs Peter to realize a couple of things. The first thing, and this you'll miss it if you read it too quick. The first thing is, Peter looks at the waves, he looks at the water, he looks at what's going on around him, and he says, I'm in danger, help. And it says, Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him. Do you know what that means? That means Jesus was already there. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but every so often I try to reach out and immediately grasp hold of my children when they're at a distance. Anyone do that? Come here, come here, come here, come here. You know, you can only get so far with that. But it says Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him. That means Jesus was standing already next to him. See, Peter was so busy worrying about how do I walk across the waves? How do I deal with the storm? He missed the fact that Jesus rushed to his side. In the middle of whatever we're facing, sometimes it seems like the waves are kind of impressive. And it seems like the storm is kind of terrifying. And we're looking for God's presence, but at the same time, we're in the midst of looking at the storm. We get distracted and don't realize that God rushes to our aid. God wants to rush to his children's side when we're in need. And then Jesus, as he's talking to Peter, he says to him, you have little faith. Why did you doubt? And I wonder, as I'm reading this, did Peter find himself thinking, what do you mean I'm the guy that got out of the boat? I'm the guy that walked to you. Are you questioning my faith? I'm the guy that gave it a shot. But Jesus is saying not that he lacked the faith to get out of the boat. Jesus is saying, why did you lose sight of the thing that got you out of the boat in the first place? When you were in the boat, you didn't say to yourself, look at those waves, look at that water, look at those breakers. You said to yourself, look at Jesus. So why'd you stop? You see, when we focus on our troubles, we take our eyes off Jesus. We take our eyes off the road. You see, just like driving up the side of Mount Evans, our faith works pretty much the same way. There are perilous peaks to our left and there are horrible drops to our right, because the life of faith is not an easy life. It requires us to put in tremendous quantities of effort and risk. And sometimes what we have to know is that the most and the only important thing in keeping ourselves safe is keeping our eyes focused on the one who keeps us safe. See, when Jesus says to his disciples, I am the way, the truth, and the life, the only way to come to the Father, what he's saying is, I'm the road. You need to keep your eyes on me. The world may have earthquakes and fires and wind like it did in our Old Testament reading. The world may have waves and wind and breakers like it did in our gospel reading. But if we are willing to keep our eyes focused on God, that's where our strength comes from. That's where our calm comes from. That's where our peace comes from. And the world can do whatever it wants to do around us, and it will not affect us. We will walk on water if and when we keep our eyes firmly focused on Jesus. Because all of the things in this world that tell us to be afraid, all of the things in this world that tell us to worry, all of the things in this world that would tell us to lose our peace. Cannot take it from us when we understand that we have a God who is bigger than all of our problems, more powerful than all of our waves and our wind and our fire and our earthquake. We have a God who will lead and strengthen us through everything. But when we lose focus, I was talking to someone once about Christian disciplines, and they were going through a rough patch in their life and all of their worries. Thank you for listening to Pastor Rus Says. We hope you subscribe on iTunes, and you can also find us at Pastor Rus Ministries on Facebook. And if you go there, you can also see our twice-a-week Bible study, preview, review, with lots of extra bonus material. We hope to see you there, and until then, God bless.